So right now, Brother Michael's going to come up and continue our series in 1 Timothy chapter 5. So appreciate him coming up, and I look forward to gleaning from his preaching this evening.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me be here. Pastor mentioned we'll be in 1 Timothy chapter 5 tonight. And the plan is to cover verses 1 and 2. I feel like I have to mention that there's only 2 verses here, verses 1 and 2. So as I was looking at this and I was going, Pastor only gave me 2 verses to cover. How am I gonna talk about this for 30 minutes? I just kept thinking about it, and we'll see what the Lord has tonight. This might be a small sermon, a sermonette, a micro sermon tonight. We'll see. No, I do have a lot to talk about tonight, but let's go ahead and just read these 2 verses to begin with. Starting chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, Paul writing to Timothy, he says, "Rebuke not an elder, but entreat him as a father, and the younger men as brethren, the elder women as mothers, the younger as sisters, with all purity." So as I began looking at these 2 verses, I always prepare a few weeks ahead, and I just sat there and I kept thinking about them. Okay, how am I going to talk for so long on these 2 verses? I just kept thinking about it, and I thought about it some more, and I thought about it some more, and eventually I decided I'm going to just get outside and think about it outside. I took my kids and my wife, and we went out and we hiked out to Blue Pool. As we were driving up Blue Pool, my kids, they started grilling me on stuff that they saw out the window. You know, there was that big fire out there, the Holiday Farm fire, and they're talking about the forest. Like, Dad, how come this forest got wiped out? What's going on here? How come there's no trees right now? Luckily for them, I actually studied forest and ecology, part of my bachelor's, and I'm reading the science papers that are coming out of the university I work for, so I have some answers for them. And it turns out ecologists are finding that forests, in tradition, has been replanted, whether you're logging or you're an environmentalist and it's been burned out. People have been planting the forests uniformly. So 1 tree here, an equal distance apart, 1 tree here, equal distance apart, 1 tree here, all the trees at once. And what we're seeing is in the Northwest, there's forests of a whole bunch of trees, all the same age, all the same height, the same distance apart. And as they've studied old-growth forests that are still around, they see these old-growth forests are not like that. Old-growth forests have trees of different heights, different ages. Some that are spread apart, some that are clumped together, some that have holes in them for meadows and stuff. And so what's going on is a lot of the scientists are thinking our forests are not diverse enough. And that's what's killing them off and why we have wildfires coming through. They get to a certain height, the fuel on the bottom gathers to a certain level, and then it's just a matter of time before the right conditions are met and that fire hits and it goes through the entire forest because it's all the same. They're all the same distance apart. The winds are the right condition. Or there's a pest that comes along. So there's pests that like a certain canopy height, and the trees will get to a certain canopy height, and that pest goes, oh, this is perfect. And he starts eating 1 tree, and it spreads to all the trees because they're all that canopy height. See, there's no diversity within the forest. So we've learned we have to do better at replanting, whether you're in the timber industry or if you're an environmentalist. We've got to replant a little bit better. What we need is forests with trees of different sizes, different ages, some real diversity among our forests. And as we were going through there and I was talking to my kids about this, it dawned on me that's actually what Paul's talking about, these 2 verses we just read. He's talking about a church that's diverse. He's talking about Timothy, you got some elder people, you have some younger people, you have some women, you have some men, you have different groups in the church. Our churches need to be diverse. We can't have only young people in the church. We can't have only seniors in the church. We wind up with churches that don't have anybody to take over when the seniors pass away, or we don't have churches who don't have anybody who's been around the block a few times, and They don't have people who are rooted in the faith. And so when something new comes along, the church gets swept away because we're all so young. That's what happens in churches that are not diverse. And so really, Paul's getting in here, and he's telling Timothy, this is how you build your church. This is your job, Timothy. You need to reach out to a diverse group of people. You need to reach out to multiple generations. Because, Timothy, we're trying to build a church that is going to last for generations. We don't want a church that is going to die in the next generation. We don't want a church that's going to get swept away in this generation. He says, Timothy, you got to reach out to multiple people to build a church that lasts. I want you to build a generational church. And the church that Christ built was a generational church. So think about the society that they were talking about here. Paul and Timothy, they lived in that old Roman society. As Paul is actually mentoring the younger generation, Timothy, that's actually going on in this letter, they would have to face some new believers who are going to have some issues in their lives. And those new believers need people around them as they're coming up within the church. The new believer in the Roman society would have some economic struggles. The guilds, like the silversmiths and the winemakers, they didn't like the Christians because the Christians didn't get into the idolatry and the reveling, and they stopped buying stuff from them. So then the guilds would turn on them, and no one would do business with the Christians in that society because they're now all alone. There would be societal issues with the new believer. The Roman society was based on the temples, and now the Christians aren't going to the temples. They're not interacting. They're now being shunned by the community. They're being persecuted by the community. There would also be some family issues to the new believer in the Roman society. A new believer, say it's a young man, he comes to know Christ, and he's not the head of his household. The head of his household might kick him out of that house. He's now all alone on the streets. Those are some issues in their society at that time. And Paul knows, hey, if we're going to have a church that's going to last, we need people who come together. We need people from all generations together to hold each other together in that Roman society. And I don't think it's any different today. Today, we still have issues. We still have people who feel alone. We still have new believers who say, I can't party anymore with the old crowd. We have new believers who say, well, all my relatives drink. I can't do that anymore. We still have people who feel alone today. So we still need this in our church. We need to have a cross-generational church. We need to have generational relationships in our church so we can come together, we can hold each other up, and we won't get swept away. We won't lose our church to the rigors of time. Today's churches, think about today's churches. There are churches out there that are dying churches. I attended one when I was about 10 years old. Fifth Street Church of God. It was right by Moffett Elementary. Moffett Elementary is no longer there. The church is no longer there either because the average age of the church was about 65 years old that I attended. Me and my two sisters were the only two kids in that church. When we left, there was no more kids. Everyone in that church has either passed away or moved away now. There are churches out there without any seniors today. There are. And the young people, they're getting swept away in secular ideas that are coming in. And the people-pleasing ideas that are coming in, and without anybody to say, hey, we've been around the block, we've seen where this goes, to tell them, you guys need to wise up, they're getting swept away and drawn away, and they're wandering and they're straying away from Christ. There are churches out there that are doing this right now. So we still have that need today. The same needs that Paul and Timothy are talking about, that Paul tells Timothy to address, they're the same needs that we still have in our churches today. We still need to address this. But the question is, how do we build that church? Let's tackle the question, how do we build a church that will last for future generations? How are we going to address this in our own church here? Well, the first thing that I would say from this passage, if we want to build a future church for generations, that we need to not strike down a generation. If there's a generation out there, we can't be striking them down. If there's a group of people out there, we can't strike them down. You might wonder where I'm getting at. Well, there are 3 key words in this passage, and I want to actually dig into the definitions of those key words. And the first one that I would look at, the very first word in the passage, read it with me, says, rebuke, not an elder. Let's look at that word, rebuke. What does rebuke mean? Well, rebuke means to, if you look it up, and I looked it up in several places, what I found, it means to strike upon, to blame, to chide, or to reprove. So to strike upon, okay, that might just be common sense. Don't strike upon someone else. Timothy, don't strike upon the elders. Okay, elder abuse, we're not going to tolerate that. That might be what you're thinking. But that's just common sense. No, we're not going to beat up the old people. Okay. What he's really getting at is a verbal striking upon. In other words, don't strike them down. He says, don't go out to them and say, hey, stop talking. Don't shout them down. Don't tell them that they're not relevant. Don't tell them they don't matter. Your opinions don't mean anything to us. Just go away. That's to strike someone down. Don't chastise them. Don't rebuke them. Don't tell them that they're not worth listening to. Don't do that to a generation. Don't do that to a group of people in your church, because that's not going to work. That's not how we build a church for generations. And the word he used there, he says, rebuke not the elders. Some people are wondering, okay, elders. Well, in other passages of the Bible, the elders uses pastor. That's not the context here. He's actually talking about the older men. He says, rebuke not the elders. He's not saying don't rebuke the pastor. You shouldn't rebuke the pastor. But also don't rebuke the older men. And when we read this passage, there's commas. There's not periods. The context carries through to those other groups mentioned. What I'm saying is if we read this the right way, he says, don't strike down an elder. Don't strike down the younger men. Don't strike down the women. Don't strike down the younger sisters. The context carries through to all of those groups. Every single group in there. Do not strike them down. Do not marginalize a group of people. What he's saying is, no one should be taken down a peg just because they are fill in the blank, whatever group you are. We don't take someone down just because they're this group. They're younger than me. They're older than me. They have funny hair. We don't take them down just because they're that group of people. When I hear this, I think of another verse. I think of James chapter 2, verse 1, where James, the brother of Jesus, he says this, my brethren, have not faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, with respect of persons. We don't practice respect of persons within our church. Respect of persons, you don't respect one group of people over another. We're all the same in the eyes of God. We're all made an image of God, every single one of us. There's no room for respect of persons within the church. Here's one way you might see it today. You might think this doesn't happen, but I see it all the time. There's a phrase out there that has gone kind of viral over the past few years. And I remember the first time I heard it, it was on the news. There was a lady from the Australian Parliament arguing with some other guys. There's a 25-year-old lady, and she's arguing with some guys who are older than her, and she says, the average age of this parliament is 49 years old, and an older gentleman off to the side, he shouts at her and says, that's impossible. And she turns to this guy and she says, okay, boomer. And then she continues her conversation. And that phrase is just kind of viral throughout the world. You hear it all the time, okay, boomer. Anytime someone that is older than you that you don't want to listen to, you can say that. Apparently, that's what society says. Okay, boomer, I don't need to listen to you. So we've got college kids telling their college professors, okay, boomer. We have high schoolers telling their high school teachers, okay, boomer. We have children telling their kids or telling their parents, okay, boomer. That's what's going on. And it's not just the younger generation doing it. I've seen memes and retorts being passed around the internet. The same thing, older people are taking that and doing the same thing to the younger people. Okay, Gen Z. Okay, millennial. You know, that's what our society does. It just passes this around, and people, they like to just tear down the other person, don't they? He says, no, don't do that. Don't let that into your church, Timothy. Don't practice that on other people. We don't marginalize other people just because they're different, just because we don't want to listen to them. We don't tell another generation just shut up and to just go away because you're irrelevant. I tell you that I think that's actually an instrument of Satan. Satan would love to divide and conquer a church. And if we start doing that in our church, he's using that to divide and conquer us. What I'm saying is that we will never build relationships using a wedge or an axe. That's not how you build a relationship. So don't forsake the other. Don't discard the other. Do not forsake the other person, the other generation. This looks like a person who only says hello to their friends. If we walk into Hillview Baptist and we walk up to our buddy, we say hello, we sit down on the couch next to them, and that's all we do until church starts. We don't check on everyone else. That's what that looks like. We're discarding everyone else. We're withholding fellowship from other people. God values all of his children. Do not marginalize one, because to marginalize one of his children is to marginalize them all. But there's another thing in here. There's another part of this. Okay? We're not talking about just don't strike them down. We have to go a little bit further in our efforts if we want to build this church. We also need to call out to all generations. We need to call out to them. And if you're wondering where I'm getting that, well, here's the second key word I want to look at. Read with me again, starting in verse 1. Rebuke not an elder, but entreat him as a father. That word entreat. Entreat him as a father. And entreat the younger men as brethren. Entreat the elder women as mothers. Entreat the younger as sisters with all purity. Well, that word entreat, we don't use it very often. But I looked that up. I just dug into that one. It said the meaning of that one means to call for, to call out to call out for this person. That's what entreat means. Call out to them for help. Hey, I see you're struggling over here. How can I help you? That's to call out to them. Or call out to them for encouragement. Hey, brother, you're doing so great. You're so spiritual. I wish I was like you. That's calling out to them. We're just walking up to them. Hey, how are you doing? How's life? That's to call out to them. What it is we don't just meet people halfway. We go out to them. We meet them where they are. That's to call out to a person, to entreat them. And there's the roles in there. He says, call out to the elder as fathers. How do you call out to someone as a father? Well, in my experience, when I call out to my father, he's getting a little up in his years, and he's a diabetic, and I care about him, so I call out to my father with care. Hey, Dad, how are you doing? How's Mom? You know, are you keeping your blood sugar in check? Is there anything you need? That's how I call out to my father. Another way I call out to my father, I call out to him for his experience. Hey, Dad, I'm going through an issue right here. I broke the sink again. How do I fix this? You know more than I do. How do I take care of this? I'm going through something. I call out to my father for experience. There's other roles in there. We could talk about these roles in our groups tonight, all night probably, because everyone's experience might be different. But there's other roles in there. The brother. How do you call out to the brother? Well, in my experience, I don't have a brother. Okay, so someone might have an advantage on me. But if I was going to call out to my brother, I'd probably call out to my brother for some companionship. Hey, bro, I'm going to go on a bike ride. You want to come with me? I saw kids doing that when I was young. Hey, brother, I'm going to go hunting. You want to come hunting with me? Companionship. Or, man, I really need help with this. Brother, I'm trying to move all this rock. Can you help me? You know, asking them for help and just being a companionship. That's how I would call out for a brother. He says, call out to the elder women as mothers. How would you call out to your mother? Again, I would care for my mother. Mother, I love you. How are you doing? But also, I'd call out to my mother for encouragement. Mom, I'm going through a really hard time in life. What am I supposed to do? I would call out to my mom for encouragement. And then sisters, how would you call out to your sister? Well, I have two sisters, so I'm not disadvantaged in this one. I have two sisters. I tell you one thing I would never do to my sisters. I would never call out to my sisters for a date. I would never look on my sisters with lust. That shouldn't be happening in the church. But you know what I do? I would call out to my sister. Hey, sister, I saw that guy looking at you funny. Do I need to go mess him up? Okay? You call out, I look after my sisters. I want to care for my sisters. Or maybe I'm having some trouble. You know, maybe when I was a kid, I sometimes had girl trouble. I would go to my sisters and ask them for help. But usually it was math. Because I had an older sister who was better at math than me. I would go out to my sister. Hey, Mom, or hey, sister, I can't do this math problem. Can you help me? So we got to call out to them as if they're those members of the family. And there are specific roles. So don't get those two roles confused. Don't call out to the brother as the father or the father as the sister. Don't confuse those roles. But what Timothy is supposed to be doing, Paul is telling Timothy, hey, you need to call out to these people as if they are part of your family. Because we are all a part of the body of Christ. We have a new family. We're all adopted by God. These are our brothers and our sisters. He says the body of the Christ are the people that we turn to for help and not the world. Don't turn to the world for help. Go to your brother and your sister. Go to the family of Christ. Our new family is who we call out to. We must build a relationship with our family by calling out to them today. Notice that Paul doesn't say, hey, Timothy, wait 2 years, then call out to them. We do that today before we're in trouble. Call out to the family today and treat them today as brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers. Remember the do nots. There's a couple do nots, some cautions here. Don't confuse the roles. Okay, don't be calling out to the brother as the father. Don't confuse those. But also, don't confuse calling out to the stranger as the brother. It's only a matter of time before the world will come calling on you. Don't call out to the world as if they're your brother. Remember, we're always prone to stray, prone to wander from Christ. But also, isolation is a problem here. Don't isolate yourself from the family. We are to call out to them. This is something we're supposed to be doing. And our tendency sometimes is when life gets hard is to pull away. So don't do that. That's a do not. And when I think about this idea of beginning this relationship, to actually listening to one another, to our advice, and treating each other like we're supposed to, there's one story in the Bible, I think, that comes to mind, and I'm sorry to say it's a story of a failure on this part. And I'd like to look at it. There's one man who I think really just did not have any sense of what he's supposed to do. His name was Rehoboam. I'd like to talk about him for a minute. Now he should have been calling out to his elders and listening to them as fathers. He should have been doing that, but he failed miserably. Turn with me to 1 Kings chapter 12. We'll spend a few minutes here, then we'll come back to this. Rehoboam, the grandson of King David, the son of King Solomon, Solomon being the wisest man who ever lived, Rehoboam, his son, did something that was really stupid. And I heard a really nice catchphrase on the radio. It said, "Stupid should hurt." I kind of agree with that. Stupid should hurt. But unfortunately, what Rehoboam did was so stupid it hurt a lot of people. It divided the country of Israel in two forever. Because he failed to do exactly what Paul is telling Timothy to do. You see, Solomon died, and Rehoboam had to take over as king. That's generally how it goes. And when you get to verse 6, Rehoboam is dealing with the first issue that comes his way. The first issue is another guy named Jeroboam is telling Rehoboam, "Hey, your dad was taxing us heavily. He was really putting a heavy yoke on us to build the temple. Will you lighten up? If you lighten up, we'll follow you forever. We'll be your best friend forever, Rehoboam." And so Rehoboam says, "Okay, Jeroboam, let me think about it. Go away for 3 days, and when you come back, I'll have an answer for you on this." And he goes to the older men, and he's supposed to be talking to them and entreating them as fathers. Listen what happens in verse 6. It says, "And King Rehoboam consulted with the old men that stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived." Notice it says they stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived. It doesn't say that the old men stood before Rehoboam at all before Solomon died. And he said, "How do ye advise that I may answer this people?" So right off the bat, I have a feeling that these older men did not really have a relationship with Rehoboam until Rehoboam became king. It said they stood before Solomon, his father, while he yet lived. They didn't stand before Rehoboam. And it doesn't say that Rehoboam called out to them while Solomon still lived. So right off the bat, I can tell something's not right here. And then continuing in verse 7, it says, "And they spake unto him, saying, If thou wilt be a servant unto this people this day, and wilt serve them, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be thy servants forever." So they actually give him some pretty good advice. They tell him, "Hey, go ahead and let up, so they will be your servant. You got to take your foot off the necks of the people." But what does he do in verse 8? It says, "But he forsook the counsel of the old men which they had given him, and consulted with the young men that were grown up with him, and which stood before him." So he did exactly what Paul told Timothy not to do. Paul told Timothy, don't forsake the counsel of these men. Don't forsake them. Don't strike them down. Rehoboam didn't have that at this time. Rehoboam went ahead. He forsook their counsel. He rebuked them. He struck them down. He discarded their counsel. But he consulted with the young men that were grown up with him. So he consulted those men that were his brothers. He should treat the men as his brothers, the young men. And he takes their counsel. What does their counsel say? In verse 9, "And he said unto them, What counsel give ye, that we may answer this people who have spoken to me, saying, Make the yoke which thy father did put upon us lighter. and the young men that were grown up with him spake unto him, saying, Thus shalt thou speak unto this people that spake unto thee, saying, Thy father made our yoke heavy, but make thou it lighter unto us. Thus shalt thou say unto them, My little finger shall be thicker than my father's loins. So the younger men who grew up with him, they're supposed to be his brothers. They give him the advice, no, you step down harder on the people. You tax them harder. You make them work harder. Don't treat your countrymen as brothers. Treat them as slaves. That's their counsel. And what did Rehoboam do? He forsook the counsel of the old men, the men that he should have been using as fathers. He should have listened to their counsel. He took the counsel of the younger men. He treated the younger men as the father, took their counsel, and Jeroboam doesn't like that answer, and he takes half the country with him, and they split forever. Complete failure. I would say it's not just on the old men for not seeking him out. I'd say it's also on Rehoboam for not seeking out the older men. I think everyone's having an issue there. But you know, this is kind of how socialism is growing in our younger generation today, actually. Because I've been in the college classrooms, and there are young people who are actually calling out and saying, hey, more socialism, more communism. And the reason they're doing that is because they don't have the relationships with the older generation who has seen what that stuff does. Their only relationship they have are the other young people around them and the wackadoo professor who's telling them that communism is great. That's how it happens. That's how we go astray. We listen to the wrong voices. We listen to the stranger instead of the brother. We listen to the brother instead of the father. Think about it. If there was more of these generational relationships in our lives and our young people in our colleges today, maybe things would be going different. And we have to do the same thing in our church, because in the book Faith in Exiles I read with Pastor, it says that 2/3 of all the young people are going to walk away once they turn 18. Can you believe that? 66% of all the young people walk away from church when they turn 18. And one of the main factors in that is no intergenerational relationships. That's one of the ways you combat it. And you can't wait until they've already gone out of the house to start that relationship. It has to start today. That's how we combat the issue of the young people walking away from God, walking away from the Lord. How do we do this? How do we start these relationships? I mean, to call out to someone is kind of lofty, right? Let's get down to earth. As an individual, if you want to start these relationships, if you want to culture some new relationships, go up to them and talk to them on an individual basis. Every time you come to church, look for someone you haven't talked to in a while. Go up to them, say hello, ask them how they're doing. Check in with them. Ask them about their interests. Ask them about their worries. We have a church roster. Call up people that need help and talk to them today. Don't wait. Don't wait until it's too late to help. I have to say, about a week and a half ago, I called Brother Tom Clone over here, because there was all those wildfires going on, all the smoke was coming in, and it looked like the sun was going down. It was so dark, and I called Brother Tom to check in on him because I knew something was going down. I wanted to make sure he was all right, and as I dialed the phone number to Brother Tom Clone, I realized this might be the first time I have ever called my brother, because he wasn't already in my contacts. I've known him for several years. And as I dialed that number, I realized I didn't do this. I didn't build that relationship today. And to be frank, I didn't deserve to host you, Brother Tom, for dinner. I didn't deserve that. You still blessed me. Don't wait until the fire's already here. Go out and talk to them today. A church can engineer these relationships too. Churches can do things to bring people together, such as like if we had a Bible fellowship that was not separated by age groups. No, this is just an idea. Okay, I'm not saying we have to do this, but something like a Bible fellowship that had different people from different ages all together, and we talked about stuff and we talked about life. A church can do that. They could have prayer meetings between different generations where the young people get with the older people and they pray for each other, prayer meetings that are intergenerational. We can pair people up as door-knocking teams with these different relationships. We could just assign partners when we do ministry. What I'm saying is that a church could generate ways that we wind up sharing life together. That's really what we're getting at, is we have to share some life together. Sit down with new people at meals. Every Go Sunday, we have a meal. You don't have to sit next to the same couple or the same person. We can share life together in different ways. We can invite people into our homes and have dinners with different people, not the same person every single week. And we can do ministry together. It really comes down to one word, and that is time. Time spent together with other people. But there's actually one guy here who I owe, and that's Brother Richard Reed. He gave me a gift a few weeks ago, and that was, he gave me a Young's Concordance, a big, thick, white book, about 50 pounds, really heavy. I used it to look up all these words. It's great for smashing spiders, too. But you know what was more valuable than that gift of the Concordance? Was just the time that I've spent with Brother Richard. I found out that he also drove truck for 10 years, big rigs. I never knew that about him. And that would have never happened if I had not spent time with Brother Richard. It comes down to time. But it also comes down to one more thing. There's one more word to look at. And that is the very last word. Verse 2, purity. We have to embrace every image of God purely to make this work. Every image of God, embrace them purely. Now that word purity, it means sinless. It's not corrupted by sin if it's pure. It's a sinless motive. Embrace every image of God with a sinless motive. Make sure that our motives when we do this are right. In other words, you don't go to a senior and you hang out with a senior to get in the will. That's not why we're doing this. You don't go to a brother. You don't just hang out with a brother because one day you're going to need to borrow some money from him, or because one day you're going to need him to help you with whatever you're working on. You don't go to a senior lady for a free babysitter all the time. You really want to spend time with this lady. You don't go to another woman for lust. We've already talked about that. It's a pure motive, a sinless motive. That's why we're doing this. That's how we're going to build that real, authentic generational church. Remember that each one of us, young or old, are an image of God, and we all glorify our Father in heaven with our existence, just being here. We all glorify God. Every wrinkled face, every toothless grin glorifies God. So begin with a desire to love your fellow image of God and that family in Christ. Begin with that desire. Make sure it's pure. That's the way that Christ loves us, and Christ is our example as well. John chapter 15, verse 9, Christ says this. He says, "As the Father hath loved me, so have I loved you. Continue ye in my love. If you keep my commandments, you shall abide in my love, even as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love." See, Christ loves us the exact same way, and we're supposed to continue in his love, the same way that he loves us. Think of it this way. Our heart is kind of like a shelf that we put our desires on. Christ puts new desires on the shelf of our heart when we become saved, and we're asking him for that. But you know what? Any shelf, any storage space, it can get dusty. It can collect some grime over time. It has to get scoured. It has to get cleaned off. We need to cleanse our hearts when we do this. We need to do it regularly so we have a pure motive. I'm talking about time spent in prayer. Lord, cleanse my heart. Lord, help me to have a pure motive. Help me to have love for my fellow man. Help me to love this person. I think there's one Bible story that just illustrates this to the point, and that is pure love. And that would be the story of Naomi and Ruth. Now, Naomi, she was a Jewish woman in the book of Ruth who had a husband and 2 sons, and there's a famine in Israel, so she goes to the land of Moab. And her 2 sons marry. They marry 2 ladies named Orpah and Ruth. And unfortunately, her 2 sons also passed away, and her husband. So now Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth, they're all widows. And Naomi does care about her 2 daughters-in-law, and she says, "Hey, I can't give you more sons It's better off for you guys if you would go back to your family, your original family, and leave me to die. She says, I'm going to go back to Israel, where I'm from, and I'm probably going to die there. And Orpah takes her up on that offer. See ya. Orpah leaves. But Ruth says, no, I'm coming with you. And she gives one of the strongest statements of pure love that I've ever heard in the Bible. Chapter 1 of Ruth, verse 16 and 17, Ruth says this. And Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go. And where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. Ruth refuses to let Naomi leave without her. Naomi had nothing to give her. She said, I have no more sons to give you. I have no wealth to give you. There was no ulterior motive at all other than loving her mother-in-law. And she says, where you go, I will go. Where you die, I will die. Because your God is my God. That is what we're looking for in the church. That's what we're looking for in these relationships with each other. There's a woman who recently said to me, she's rather old, and I've been trying to get her to come more recently, but she said to me, I'm so old, all my friends are gone. I'm all alone. There's no reason for any image of God to go through life all alone. We're built in the image of God. That means that we're built to have a relationship with God. We're built to have a relationship with other people. We will die of loneliness. No image of God should be left alone in the church. So make it your heart's desire that no one goes through life alone at Hillview. Not the older people, not the younger people. I've been there when teens have asked me some very difficult questions. They shouldn't have to struggle through those questions alone. I've been present when a senior has struggled with the loss of a loved one. No one should have to go through that alone. We all are going to need someone someday to go through the fire with, and that can only be done with a pure heart for others, the way that Christ had a heart for us. So ask God to cleanse your heart and to purify your love for others to move forward with this. You see, our sin condition is always going to pull us the wrong way. And as we pray for help building the generational church, we need to pray for a cleansed heart to take this on. So that is my challenge I leave you with. Pray for a pure heart towards others. If you spend some time in prayer tonight, pray for that. Just a pure heart towards others.